Hi all. I'm making this video so that we don't lose a day of instruction and so that you have all of the information that you need to draft your first lesson plan. Hopefully some of you have already started on it, but I'm going to go over all the bits and pieces that need to be in it, including how to use the template and what sections to fill out and what sections not to fill out. The video is going to be useful because you don't have to listen to it just one time, but you can go back and review to see if you might have missed something. But I'm basically going to start, oh, by the way, since I'm on this page, these are the two documents that you're going to want to use for your lesson plan. The first one right here, it says Copy of World Languages Instructional Plan. Okay, this one is a Google Doc. If you feel more comfortable working in Google Docs, use this one. If you feel more comfortable working in Word, then use this one, and that's the one I'm and I'll show you exactly how to fill out each of the sections. But it's pretty simple for lesson plan number 1 because we're only basic to fill in. And so while it's loading, I'll your pieces of the lesson plan that I'm asking you for are the outcomes, which, as you see the page load, you can see that we have the outcomes are going to go here in this box. So there's going to be one outcome for knowledge, and then there's going to be another outcome here for skills. This is where you're going to put your outcomes. The only other little bits of information, of course, besides our teaching plan down here, okay, that you're going to need to add is what proficiency level, give me some idea of the theme here in this box, and the subject. But I'm going to come back to this in a minute because I'm going to show you a successful lesson plan number 1, and I want to go over, all of the pieces of it to show you why it was successful, and then we'll talk about the components of each section later. What I really want to do right now is start off with a PowerPoint. Okay, so basically I want to review. There were a couple students that weren't in class last week, and I thought it would be a good idea to review how to design for the interpretive mode. So I'm going to try not to go into, well, I guess I'll go into screen mode here. So basically, to remind some of you who were in class last week, but basically how do we design in the interpretive mode? Okay, so you can see that maybe if my computer wants to respond. Okay, sorry for the abrupt edit there, but this is the page I wanted you to see here, and I'm not going to go into full screen mode because for some reason my computer is being a little problematic. Okay, so we talked about two different types of comprehension that we could measure with an activity in the interpretive mode. We can measure literal comprehension, okay, or we can measure interpretive comprehension. So literal comprehension is, do they get the gist of the idea? Do they understand what the content of the article or the video or whatever the text they might be reading is? The second type of interpretation that we could measure is interpretive comprehension, which is basically understanding the inferences, the cultural perspectives, the intent of the author, the symbolism underlying the text. We're not going to worry so much about interpretive comprehension. We're going to focus more on literal comprehension. Can students capture the gist of the article or video they might be watching? Second, we emphasize the importance of a graphic organizer. We talked about different strategies for using a graphic organizer, how to make them both accessible for students so that they can organize the content they're grasping from these articles, but also the graphic organizer needs to be used as a tool for integration. By integration, I mean as a tool for bringing language production during the interpretive mode activity into the next activity. So this allows us to, have our students produce L2 and then take those sentences, those answers to questions, those descriptions of pieces of the video into the next activity that might be interpersonal or presentational. So graphic organizers are important. Also, another reason they're important is because they allow us to measure whether our students are actually understanding the text we assign them or not. If they don't write anything down, then we have nothing to measure. We don't have a magical comprehension meter we can place on them to find out whether they understood. As far as choosing tasks for these types of activities, we want to make sure that they're authentic listening and viewing and reading activities. We don't want them to be reading, baby texts written only for students. These should be authentic. They should be from the culture of L2. We also want to encourage them to focus on specific things within the text. It's okay for us to give them strategies to help them get better at reading small chunks of text. This is the way we can teach reading and comprehension in a much more hands-on way. If you're going to do interpretive activities as a group, okay, you're also going to want to allow them to collaborate during the interpretive process. In other words, give them specific tasks within the video. One group identifies adjectives. Another group identifies verbs. So depending on what your activity is and what you're asking them to focus on, you can assign different roles within the group. I kind of like keeping the group small for interpretive activities. I would say no more than pairs seems to work best this way. And then we'll talk later about how to move students into the interpretive comprehension mode. Right now, let's focus on literal. So, I have also some more activity design principles here. And I like activities that ask students to target the main ideas or supporting details for a particular article. And this way they're focusing on what particular types of information might be in the text, and we need to help them train their minds to extract the gist or to extract certain kinds of details that obviously they're going to need in later activities. Okay, our text should be focused on simple narratives, on routines, on familiar contexts. It's not a good idea for them to be exposed to critical thinking at this point. It's not a good idea for us to introduce very complex tasks. Keep it simple. The range of sentence length should be variable. Obviously, this depends on their proficiency level, but we need to be careful about the text we choose so that it corresponds with the proficiency level of the students. Obviously, we want the topics to be of high interest to our students. That way they'll be engaged. And then we want the learners to somehow use the information from their text or video in some sort of problem-solving, descriptive task. And this is where the graphic organizer comes in. So this is pretty much what we covered in class already, and you should be familiar with these principles since the book is talking about them very carefully in the different sections that deal with the three modes of communication. So these are just some examples here of different types of reading or listening activities. So you can see there's everything from product advertisements to interviews to simple stories and songs and podcasts. These are possible texts that students could engage with. Next, I'm going to dive into interpersonal. Again, we covered this in class and we even did some activities. But, how do we design activities for the interpersonal mode? Okay, so when we're in interpersonal, obviously it's a two-way exchange of information. Probably the most important thing about interpersonal tasks is that we have to have an information gap. In other words, when we put two students together to have a conversation, student A has to have access to a certain packet of information that student B needs. So then student B needs to ask questions of student A about the information that student A has in order to solve the problem. So in general, this is what we want to do. We talked about this in class and we even practiced it, and there were some excellent examples of student activities that exploited an information gap. Okay, I don't like to allow notes or written support for these conversations, but obviously this is a decision that's based on the proficiency level of the students. The reason I don't like notes is because notes tend to be in L1. We don't want notes of any kind in L1. I would never allow L1 notes. Now, if some students want to put L2 notes, perhaps certain vocab words they have trouble remembering, they need to put it in a little bit of a cheat sheet during these conversations, you should decide this. It's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's one that we want to wean them off the notes as much as possible so that the conversation is more authentic. We don't run around in real life with note cards to inform us. So we want to keep it as real as possible, but we also don't want to frustrate our students. What are some of the strategies for creating good interpersonal communication activities in the classroom? So number one, we need to do these activities regularly, because when they're in the process of practicing spontaneous speech, when they're not being graded, it reduces their anxiety level. So they get used to practicing. They expect that every single class period there's going to at least be one or two interpersonal activities where they're going to be required to solve a problem by exchanging information between two students. We also want to help them use specific discourse markers or key phrases in order to negotiate meaning. So they're going to have a packet of questions like ¿Cómo se dice? Or ¿Qué quiere decir? Or, ¿Cómo es que puedo decir tal cosa? These are all discourse markers and key phrases that they might need in order to solve more immediate problems in a conversation. Okay? Reduce reliance on notes. We talked about that. Negotiate meaning. In other words, there's an information gap. They're expected to extract specific information from one student to another. One of the easiest ways to create this information gap and exchange of information is by assigning students roles. If we happen to be working on food, and you could give a student the task of going to the fruit market, fruit, and they only have a certain budget, that means that the student has to ask questions about the fruit. They also have to ask questions about the price of the fruit. In this way, they're exchanging information back and forth. One student's the shopkeeper, one student's the customer, and they have a particular problem to solve. These are the best types of activities. Okay? And then here's a list of examples of good interpersonal tasks. And you'll notice that there's interviews, debates, role-play dialogues, task-based problem solving, all kinds of possibilities here for developing interpersonal tasks. The one thing that we didn't cover last week was presentational mode, so I wanted to address that really fast here in the video, and then we can move forward with how to write up your lesson plan. So, the presentational mode, as you remember, because we've talked about it generally, is where the students create a message to communicate to an audience either in written form or spoken form. Okay, obviously presentational is a one-way communication. It goes from the student outward, hopefully to a public, hopefully to an authentic audience. We also use presentational tasks as summative assessments. It's a good opportunity for us to see where our students are developing certain skills and where they need help developing others. This is an opportunity for assessment. And by assessment, I mean we can provide them feedback on whether they're meeting certain steps in their learning process. Okay, are they using complete sentences? Are they using proper vocabulary? Are they addressing the parameters of our presentation? Okay, are their descriptions complete? Is there relevance? See, there's all sorts of things that we can assess here with a presentational task. One of the things that we're starting to look at when we design presentational tasks is we want to increase this idea of impact. So impact is important. In other words, how good is the presentation at maintaining the attention of the reader? Okay, and this is something that we need to teach explicitly too. Perhaps there's a small preparatory activity where we show students how to ramp up the impact of their presentation, either through visual aids, better description, rhetorical questions. There's all sorts of strategies that we can use to make the impact greater. Okay, so more strategies. These are more design strategies, really. I like using a process-oriented approach. If you all Those of you who have studied with me in my other classes will know that a research paper has multiple steps. You know, you propose a thesis, then you propose an outline, then you tell me what methods you're going to use. This is a process-oriented approach, and it actually helps us as teachers to give our students more periodic feedback. So if they develop a poor thesis and continue and do the whole project based on a poor thesis, then they're going to get to the end and they're going to have a poor project. But if we give them steps and give them feedback, okay, then this allows us to sort of guide them in the process and help them see ways to strengthen their research project or whatever presentational task they might be doing. You'll notice I put this in caps. We need to create clear parameters for what should be included in the presentation. And again, if you've studied with me, you see that all of my writing assignments have very clear steps as well as guidelines for what should be included in the presentation. When we get to an example in a minute of lesson plan number 1, I'll probably point out the parameters that this particular student used in her presentational tasks. Now, this next strategy is a little more advanced. Okay, incorporate peer and self-evaluation into the feedback loop. This is a great idea, but it's not a great idea for beginning students. This is something that we'll start including more at the intermediate level. So I would say, let's not look at this one yet. Okay. Also, this next stage right here, address the issue of impact in your rubric. Now, we're not talking about rubrics yet. Okay, what we're talking about right now are simple designs for presentational mode. We'll talk more about rubrics later towards the end of the semester, or if you take the Methods 2 course, we'll go into rubrics in a lot more detail. So here's some examples of good presentational mode tasks. Okay, so you'll see you have your writing tasks and your speaking tasks in the different columns, and there are all kinds of possibilities. A couple I can see that aren't even here. Well, I take it back. There's a video here also. So you'll see that there's all sorts of possibilities. Even when it comes to speaking tasks, I try to have some sort of writing element so that we can give feedback regarding grammatical precision, use of vocabulary. Sometimes in speaking tasks, when a student stands up in front of the class and delivers their speech, the words just sort of disappear in the air, and it becomes much more difficult to give our students contextualized feedback. Contextualized feedback is very important to understand your developing skills. So a lot of times with the speaking tasks, I will include a request for some sort of writing attached to it. So for example, if I assign a video, almost always I ask students for a guion, okay, a script. So, you know, without the script, okay, I have to evaluate the student's presentation while they're giving it live, okay, and the student can't go back and review their own performance to see what my feedback is based on. That's why I kind of like to have a guion, because I can put my notes in the margins of the guion during the presentation. So this is basically what presentational mode is, okay? Create clear parameters is the big deal here. This is what we're focused on. Okay, I'm going to stop the video for a second so I can get the rest of it organized, and then. Okay, welcome back. As you can see outside, it's snowing still. So what I want to do now is I want to show you one student's lesson plan. Oh, first let me remind you, okay, at the beginning of the video I went over this, but I just wanted to show you, here are the templates that you can use for your lesson plans. Okay, this one is a Google Doc, this one is the Word template. So you'll download this document from the file I just showed you here in your Drive. Notice this is your website here. This is all in the Drive file, and then come down here, download this, and then you can actually take a copy of this and start working. Click on the download button right here. You're basically downloading a shell of this document, and the only sections I'm going to ask you to fill out are proficiency level, subject, okay, in other words, what's the topic, Okay, give your lesson plan a title here in the theme box. Okay, don't worry about the standards for right now. Just ignore all of these other boxes until you get to this box right here that says knowledge. This is where you're going to put your outcomes. 3 weeks ago, we did lessons on how to develop good outcomes for our lesson plans. This is where you'll put the knowledge ones. This is where you'll put the skills. So you can see it says student will know, and then all you need to do is fill in the rest here. Ignore content vocabulary. Okay, ignore this assessment box where it says stage 2. We're not going to worry about this yet. We'll be working on this in lesson plan number 2. But here is the final box that you need to worry about in lesson plan number 1, and that is your list of learning activities. And I want to talk about how the learning activities should be described, how the examples should be configured, but I'm going to do that by using a student's project. Okay, this is a student from last semester. As you can see right here, okay, she did her project on body parts and pain and doctors and whatnot. Okay, so she didn't fill out any of these other boxes right here. That's fine, that's perfect. But then when you come down here to the outcomes, you can see that she's telling me that the vocabulary associated with body parts, she gave me a short list of examples. This is excellent, this is good, exactly what I'm looking for. Also, apparently some of the knowledge the students will develop by the end of the lesson will include adjectives associated with pain or ailments. And then again, she had a short list. I'm not looking for anything really more than 4 words in a list so that I can get an idea of what specific types of knowledge you're programming into your lesson plan. Here is the more important outcome section. Obviously, what skills are the students going to develop? You'll notice that she says students will be able to identify body parts. Okay? By itself, it's not a very good outcome because you can identify body parts without using L2. But as I look down and I see that they're going to go even beyond identification, I'm just going to leave this alone. It's fine the way it is. Okay, ask, assert, and discuss symptoms with a peer. Okay, these are all great verbs and a really good skill that you want to develop. They're going to be able to describe the level of pain of a person who might be ill. And again, notice that as much as possible, she's providing me with short, simple examples so that I can see what type of description she wants to activate. Okay, students will be able to write a list of ailments that require medical attention. Okay, more examples. And here, students are going to compare and contrast the different types of medical emergencies in order to identify where to go for medical help. So again, I want you to look at all of these skills she's planning on developing, and you'll notice that they don't really have a lot to do with Spanish. They don't have a lot to do with L2. They have to do with solving health-related problems, and this is what we want. We want our students not to be thinking so much about the L2 that they're using, the language, the grammar. We want them to be thinking about solving problems, about describing, about interacting. These are proficiency-based problems that we want them to be able to do. So you can see what my feedback was for lesson plan number 1 for her. These are all great. I was very happy with them. Okay. Next, she decided to include some content vocabulary for me. That's fine. It's not required. She decided to throw it in there. It's actually not a bad idea to put it in there because then as you're designing your lesson plan, you can see what types of words you want to design into your learning activities, which is obviously the next step. So here we have learning activities. She's labeled them number 1, number 2, number 3 as we move down. Okay, so first one is an interpretive task. She says play the video that shows the different body parts. She's giving me a link to the actual video, which is excellent, which is exactly what I want to see. Okay, they're going to tape an enlarged version of the human body on the wall. They're going to split the class into 3 groups, okay, and then they're going to begin to identify the different parts of the body, okay. It looks kind of like a quiz, okay. This is the head, okay, the ball hit me in the head, I cut my finger. So you can see the different types of L2 she's expecting her students to generate. Okay, these examples are super important. I need to see what type of L2 you will expect your students to produce as a result of any activity. You don't need to give me the whole conversation. You don't need to give me 10 sentences that they could produce, but 2 or 3 is a good idea. It helps me visualize what you're trying to accomplish in the classroom. I think it helps you to also understand that your goal is for them to produce complete sentences that address different connections between pain and body parts. Okay, she's also told me about a handout that they're going to fill out. Okay, because some of the stuff they're going to do, it sounds like out loud, some of the stuff they're going to do on the handout. Now, as I look at this, okay, I'm thinking to myself, what pieces of information are going into the handout? I don't see the handout. Sometimes students choose to include their graphic organizer in the lesson plan, or sometimes students choose to merely describe the graphic organizer. Whatever you choose to do is fine. Okay? And then I also noticed right here, you'll see my feedback to her. This is a good warm-up, okay, but I noticed there's so little L2 use. Only the group leaders are reading from the diagram. So again, I go on to say there's got to be a better way to get them to use more language, and I think that's why she added this stuff in green right here, because again, she did a rewrite. After getting my feedback, she made some changes here, and she put her changes in green so that I could see that the students are now generating complete sentences, that each member in the group has an opportunity to go up and address the body part or label or whatever. Okay, so again, this is a good beginning. Now what we're going to see here is that she's going to take this same information that they were generating and extracting from this giant map of the body on the wall, okay, and now they're going to create symptoms associated with different parts of the body. Okay, so look at the description. She's going to give half of the class an index card, okay, and the other half is going to have a card with the body part on it. Okay, so then we're going to get the instructions down here. Okay, once the students have found their matching partner, they're going to ask their partner the following questions. Okay, have you suffered from blah blah blah? Okay, so you can see the type of questions that she's asking, and you can also see the examples of what the students would produce in this type of a conversation. Now let's see what my feedback is. Okay, my feedback is I'd like to see more L2 use. So this is a common bit of feedback. A lot of times students, when they're first designing, they're not having their students produce a lot of L2 as a result of these activities. I'm always trying to maximize the amount of Spanish students use during learning activities. We learn more by using Spanish than we do by looking at it. That's why I want students to use a lot of L2. So she obviously has addressed this because she's told me that the students are going to have to ask their partner these particular conditions. I like this. This also serves as parameters for the conversation. For the conversation to be successful, the students have to address 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, bits of information about pain they felt in the past. Okay, good activity. Everything is integrated so far. We're building their ability to describe the body parts and associated pains. That's good. Okay, so now the next activity, she's handing out a pain chart that describes different levels of pain along with pictures. Okay, she's also going to hand out a list of adjectives that describe types of pains people feel. Okay, she gives me examples of the lists here. Okay, using the list of adjectives to serve as a resource for whether a symptom is severe or minimal, each student will write 3 sentences describing 3 different symptoms that range, okay, the following way. Okay, so here's one that's a small pain, here's a medium pain, here's a severe pain. Okay, so these examples are good. Obviously, I can tell what type of language she expects them to produce. But also these examples are going to be good models to use in the classroom when you're setting up the activity. Another reason why it's a good idea to include examples. Okay, now What do I say over here? Good examples, but I'd like to see more clearly how and why they're using these words. In other words, if you're going to have them use words, I'm not sure what the reason is. Now, granted, the examples are great, they're complete sentences, okay, but when we're giving students a particular task, if we make it a role-playing task or some sort of problem-solving task, then the students know why they're doing it. If they're just producing language just to produce language, okay, then it's less engaging and less meaningful for them. So we want them to know why they're doing it. Okay, again, make one student the doctor and one student the patient. And in this way, it's clear why they're exchanging information. Okay, now this is another really good activity. I like this activity a lot, and again, you should notice right here, this is an interpersonal activity. So here's an example of how the conversation might go. It's very easy for me to understand what she's trying to accomplish here when I can see these examples. Sometimes descriptions don't make it perfectly clear. That's why we always include examples. So, activity number 4, handout sheet, 3 columns, medical care places. So it looks like now she's going to begin to do some sort of medical triage. She's going to decide whether to send them to the medicine cabinet, to the doctor's office, or to the hospital, I'm guessing. Okay, but she's using these pain charts, and the students have to write down in complete sentences at least 2 symptoms per column that may lead them to a visit at a medical center. Okay, have the students pair with a peer and add symptoms. So this is a written project, probably a short presentational task. Now that I'm looking at this, I think we could get a little bit more clarity. Number one, I don't see any examples. So I would probably, add something right here. If I had a comment, I might say, please give me examples of student L2 production. Okay, I'm not going to do that because this was a project from last semester and she'll think I'm nuts when she finds out I'm still grading last semester's assignments. Okay, at the very end, here we have activity number 5. Okay, the students are going to design a scenario of how either person could respond to the complaint and symptom that a person presents. Okay, I had some questions over here. It seemed a little bit unclear about how this exchange was happening. So I said, are they going to write this down first? Are they going to speak? So then she, in her rewrite, gave me an idea that this is written down first, okay, before they perform in front of the class. Okay, sometimes you need to be explicit about the stages of these activities. Be explicit about your expectations. Be explicit about how you're breaking the groups up. Be explicit about why the students are exchanging information. All of these things are very important. What I do want to call attention to is something that I mentioned in an earlier part of the presentation. Okay, here we have clear parameters that must be included in this presentation. So you can see, section A, tipo de relación que hay entre ambas personas. Aquí es bien importante indicar cuál es la conexión entre las dos personas, padre, hijo, etc. Okay. Número 1, ¿dónde se encuentran? Okay. Número 2, tipo de cuidado que necesitan. Aquí en este segmento, uno tiene que presentar como parte de este trabajo, okay, una evaluación del tipo de ayuda que necesitan. Okay. Entonces también pueden ver sección D y todo esto son parámetros, lo que el estudiante tiene que incluir en la presentación, okay, para que sea una presentación exitosa. Okay. And then finally we get to the end and we see that she's given me a short dialogue of how this might play out. Now what's interesting is this looks like a presentational task, but in the end, because we're asking our students to perform this in front of the class, it comes out in dialogue form, and it's really a combination between presentational and interpersonal. Okay, so I'm noticing also right here in her activity that maybe she could modify one of the earlier activities so that they have questions, or so that they get experience making questions first. This is something that we need to teach them explicitly, the formation of questions so that they can have these interpersonal tasks. Okay, so I hope this model of another lesson plan will give you a Also, please remember when you're drafting these that I understand for many of you this is the first time you're doing this, and I see your learning as process-based. In other words, you're going to send me your ideas, I'm going to look them over, we're going to look at a way to make them more complete, more thorough, more clear. Remember, this is a process, so the feedback is meant to help you, it's not meant to harm you or criticize you. Please email whatever questions you have directly to me. Ciao, muy buenas.